Okay, so psychedelics. After being on the sidelines for decades, they are suddenly back in a huge way. We're seeing all this incredible promise for treating some of the toughest mental health conditions out there. But, there's this one massive question hanging over everything. How do they actually work? So let's dive in. Let's really unpack the science behind the whole experience. So, to really get why everyone's so excited, you gotta start with this one number 72%. Seriously, just that number alone is making the entire field of psychiatry sit up and pay very close attention. So, what is that 72%? Well, in a major clinical trial, almost three-quarters of people with major depression, people who got psilocybin assisted therapy, were still showing a significant response a whole year later. Think about that, a full year. We're not talking about a temporary fix here. These are really strong, long-lasting effects from just one or two sessions. So yeah, you can see why the medical world is buzzing about this. And that right there brings us to the core mystery, doesn't it? How can one single experience with a molecule lead to such deep, lasting changes? To figure that out, we've got to take a little step back and look at how we even got to this point. This whole fascination isn't really new. Psychedelic research, it actually kicked off with a huge bang back in the mid-20th century, before it was basically shut down for decades. And now here we are. It's right back at the cutting edge of psychiatric research. The whole story really starts with one guy's, well, accidental discovery. Right, it all kicked off with this guy, Albert Hofmann. He was a chemist working at Sandoz Labs back in 1943. And after accidentally getting exposed to a compound he'd made, he decided to deliberately take a small dose to see what would happen. What he wrote down, it was incredible. He described this uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures and an intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. And that one report, it basically launched the entire scientific quest to figure out what on earth these molecules were doing to the brain. And man, what a roller coaster that investigation has been. Through the 50s and 60s, LSD was actually seen as this super promising tool for psychotherapy. But then it got tangled up with the counterculture, and a full-blown moral panic set in. That led to the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, which just slammed the door shut on all this research for pretty much 50 years. It's only in the last few years that the doors creaked back open, kicking off the renaissance we're seeing right now. Okay, so let's zoom in. We're going to go from that big picture history down to the microscopic level of your brain. We need to talk about the exact biological system these things are targeting. And a great way to think about it is like a lock, a very, very specific lock. And here it is. This is our lock, the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor. It's just a protein sitting on the surface of your brain cells, and you find it mostly in the parts of the brain that do all the heavy lifting. Your higher level thinking, your perception, the cortex. This little guy is the main target for all the classic psychedelics. We're talking LSD, psilocybin, you name it. So why does this work? Well, it's basically a case of molecular mimicry. Psychedelic molecules like psilocin or LSD, they look almost identical to your brain's own serotonin, structurally speaking. And because they look so similar, they can act like a key that fits perfectly into that 5-HT2A lock. And we know for a fact, after tons of research, that activating this specific lock is non-negotiable. It has to happen to get the psychedelic effect. But this is where the story gets really cool. See, it's not enough to just have a key that fits. It turns out that not all keys turn the lock in the exact same way. The how you turn it is just as important, maybe even more important, than the fact that it fits. And this, right here, is where the science gets wild. And that how has a name. It's called biased agonism. I know, it sounds a little technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Imagine you have a lock, and when you turn the key, it can do two different things. It can either unlock the door, or it can ring a bell. A biased key is one that's designed to only do one of those things. It'll unlock the door, but it won't ring the bell. It selectively picks one pathway and ignores the others. And that's exactly what psychedelics are. They are biased keys. Okay, so let's put them side by side. When your brain's own natural serotonin, the body's key, hits that 5-HT2A receptor, it kicks off a standard, everyday set of signals inside the cell. But when a psychedelic like LSD comes along and binds to that exact same receptor, it turns the lock just differently. And that different turn engages a whole new set of signals that serotonin just doesn't touch. And here's what that looks like on the inside. That one receptor can kick off at least two big signaling pathways.
The first one, which involves a protein called GQ/11, gets activated by pretty much anything that fits the lock. But that second pathway, the one involving a protein called G/O, that one is special. It seems to be activated only by psychedelics. And researchers think this specific G/O pathway is the one that's directly responsible for the trip itself.
So here's the bottom line. Psychedelics leave a unique molecular fingerprint. Think of it like this. Other drugs might trigger that first pathway, the GQ/11, but only psychedelics hit both pathways at the same time. And it's this dual activation that kicks off a whole unique cascade of events, even turning on specific genes in the cortex that you just don't see with other compounds. That's it. That's the molecular signature of a psychedelic.
All right, so that's the chemistry. That's the immediate reaction that happens in the moment. But how does that one event, that one trip, lead to benefits that can last for months or even years? Well, the answer seems to be a process that allows the brain to literally rewire itself. And that process is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, in the simplest terms, is just the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to change, to adapt, to form new connections. I mean, every single time you learn something new or you create a new memory, you are physically changing the wiring between your neurons. It's the most fundamental way our brain learns and grows. And it turns out, psychedelics are like a massive booster for this process. The whole sequence looks something like this. Step 1, the psychedelic hits that 5-HT2A receptor. Step 2, that unique signaling cascade, the one with both pathways, gets triggered. Step 3, that cascade turns on the genes that are responsible for growth and making new connections. And the result? Your neurons physically start to sprout new branches, new dendrites, reaching out and forming brand new connections. And here is the absolute kicker. These changes aren't just temporary, they aren't fleeting. The research is showing that a single dose can encourage this new growth for up to a month, a whole month. We're talking about a profound physical remodeling of the brain's circuits. And that, many scientists believe, is the real reason for those long-lasting benefits we saw earlier. It's not just a chemical change, it's a structural one. The brain is literally getting rewired. But this very discovery, this idea that the real healing might be coming from that molecular level rewiring, has kicked off one of the biggest, most important debates happening in the field right now. And the question is simple but huge. Is the trip itself, that profound, subjective, hallucinatory experience, a necessary part of the therapy, or is it just a wild side effect of the real healing process happening at the cellular level? Okay, so you've basically got two big camps on this. On one side, you have the people who say the experience is everything. They point to all this data that shows a strong link. The more meaningful and mystical someone finds their trip, the better their long-term results. For this group, the therapy is the psychological insight you get during that state. But then, on the other side, you have the camp that says, no, the plasticity is the whole point. They believe the real medicine is that molecular rewiring, and the trip is just a very intense but ultimately unnecessary side effect. And these are the folks trying to engineer it out, to create a drug that gives you the rewiring without the hallucination, which would obviously make it way more accessible. And look, the evidence for the experience is essential camp is pretty compelling. I mean, study after study keeps finding this direct link. The people who report having these profound, mystical experiences, the ones who have deep psychological insights, they're the ones who are most likely to get better long term. And for a lot of researchers, that connection is just too strong to be a coincidence. So that leaves us with this final and I think fascinating question. We are standing right on the edge of what could be a revolution in mental health care. But what's that future going to look like? Is it going to be a pill you take, one that just silently rewires the brain's hardware in the background? Or is it going to be a profound, guided experience that fundamentally transforms the mind's software? We don't have the answer yet, but figuring out this mystery, that's going to define the entire next chapter of medicine.